Jim,
Game.
hello.
Hey,
Good,
Christine.
good to see you. Good to have you on the
Yeah.
show. So how are you doing today?
Doing great. Just excited to catch up with you. I haven't seen you in a few weeks.
I know it has been a while. But it's and let's see, I was at your house in November.
I know.
It feels
Thanksgiving.
like
Thanksgiving. Yeah.
so long ago. I got to hang out with Mackie and
Yeah.
everyone.
And a lot has happened since then, and I'm excited about your new cohort. So
Thank
I
you.
look forward to meeting them and getting to know them.
Amazing. Yeah, yeah. So tell me, I guess we're in February now, but still kind of the new year.
It is Chinese New Year today.
It is,
Yeah,
it
New
is
Year. Yeah.
Chinese New Year today. So yeah, Happy New Year.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, do you have a New Year verse or focus or resolution or something that you have for this year, 2022?
Well, for the company,
Mhm.
we do have a theme, and it's called C 2022.
Mm.
And we've been using the ocean metaphor because in 2019 it was ship 19. We were building our ship, and in 2020 and 2021 it was sail 2021 because we were gonna sail our ship. And now it's about C 2022 because we've got the open ocean, and it's about sustainability. This will be the year when the whole enterprise will be sustainable. So we're really looking forward to that. And it's about expansion. So it's time to really scale up. And it's also about acceleration.
Mm.
As we expand, we need to be able to be more efficient and move faster.
Mm.
So that's sort of what this year will be about. We're going to be growing, and we need to be moving faster. And we are looking forward to being completely financially sustainable
Mm.
this whole year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What
By God's grace. By God's
what
grace.
a journey. And we're going to circle back on hybrid a little bit more, but I want to start first with you. Tell us a little bit about Jim Ayala. Where'd you grow up? How'd you get started in business? And tell us a little bit about your journey that brought you to hybrid.
Okay. Well, I'm from the Philippines. Went to the Ateneos. I was a product of good Jesuit education, which means at an early age we were always being, sort of uh, prodded to be a man for others. And so that was always, I think, a big part of our ethos is that we're meant to be men for others, and I think that really sunk in with me. So when I went off to college, I actually I went to Princeton in the States, and I was very focused on economics, especially economics for developing countries. But I love technology, so I was also doing a lot of electrical engineering and computer science. So that was sort of what I studied, and at Princeton, our motto was in the nation's service and in the service of all nations. And so a lot of what I was interested in was taking my education and bringing it back to the Philippines, so that I could help with economic development. This was actually what my father had asked me to do when he was on his deathbed. When I was 14 years old, he pulled me and my older brother aside. There were five of us kids and my mom, and he was on his deathbed, and he said, "You two boys take care of your mom and your siblings. Make sure everyone gets a good education, and you guys come back and serve our country." So I guess it was always in my in the environment that that I was meant to serve and serve my country, and so that influenced me a lot between the Jesuit education and my father's exhortation, on his deathbed.
Wow. Wow. And I'm curious, your dad, what was his background? Like, what do you think prompted that really deep desire and conviction for him and like his family to go back and serve his country?
Yeah, he was just an amazing man. It was really, for us, it was such a tragedy because he was only 41 years old when he passed away.
Wow.
And, we were five little kids.
Wow.
But we were very fortunate that, my mom actually put together a book for his 20th death anniversary. So 20 years later after he passed. And she invited people to write stories about him and what they remembered about him.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing book. And there were so many, we were quite young, so I really only knew him as a dad. So it was really nice to see memories from his friends, from people at work, from his bosses, from his subordinates, and how they really just felt that he was just a person of great excellence, of great compassion, who really believed in service. He was an honest civil servant. During the Marcos era, he was one of the sort of technocrats. When he left government, he was chairman of the board of investments at 30 something. But then after martial law and when things started getting a little bit crazy, he left government and went into private sector. So he has a lot of friends from both sides, and they really remembered him fondly. And it really stuck with me, how people remember you, as we start on our careers, as we go about doing what we're going to do. It's really instructive to understand what's important to people about a person. And I think my dad's just humanity and his qualities of excellence and compassion, and ultimately just complete trust and service to God. That just permeated everything about him.
Wow. Wow. And where are all of you siblings now?
We've got we've got three in the Philippines, two still in the States. Everyone I think did sort of followed my dad's advice. So everyone got a really good education. Thank goodness for scholarships and financial aid. So we were able to all get good educations. Four of us came home and we're working in different sectors here. My sister, who is the youngest, got married early, and so she's in the States, but she heads a shelter for battered Asians. So she is in service. My other brother's in education. My other brother is in media and tech, and I had another brother in agriculture. So we each had our own spheres, but I think collectively, my mom is quite proud of how we've sort of lived out our lives and been able to help in our community, our country, but at the same time, the family is super, super close, and it is a very important ministry for me. My family, my own nuclear family with my brothers and my mom, and then of course I've been married for 31 years. We've got three wonderful kids who are making their way in the world. So that's a really, really important ministry for me as well.
Yeah. No, amazing. And I can only imagine how proud your parents are, and even your father looking down. That's amazing. And I know, Jim, you're man with many different accolades, right? You already mentioned Princeton, and then of course Harvard Business School, Harvard Kennedy School as well. Going off to McKinsey, leading Ayala Land as a CEO for many years, building some of the most iconic areas of our country, which is amazing. And then, of course, now an award-winning Kingdom and social entrepreneur with multiple awards. That could go on, right? But I'm just curious. So, but for you, at this stage, at this point in your life, if you were to kind of summarize, like who are you? How would you describe like your identity at its core?
Well, I guess for me, it would really start with who my maker made me to be. I think my identity is very much in line with my maker because he made me and designed me for a particular purpose in my life. And I would say that at the very, very core, I'm a disciple and Christ follower. When Jesus came and he proclaimed the good news, it was really about the kingdom being at hand, and he called people to become disciples. And so I think that's first and foremost, because he is my maker and my master. I would say that first and foremost that I am a disciple of Christ. Now, how that translates is really around my role in the different kingdoms that I'm involved in. And I guess a kingdom are areas where, I've been given some level of influence and authority. And I like to think of those as my ministries as well. So I already mentioned that one important ministry would be my family. Another really important ministry would be what I do at church, especially in terms of what you're also doing, marketplace ministry, kind of using enterprise, to advance God's kingdom. And thirdly, in terms of my own specific area of work, I would say I am a kingdom and social entrepreneur. That I am, I've been put here and have been given the task to actually, solve social problems through business. That's what a social entrepreneur is, and we're solving social problems through enterprise. And at the same time, I've recently come to learn also that I can incorporate kingdom values into my enterprise and not just solve social problems, but also advance God's kingdom. So, and do that as an entrepreneur. So that would be my core work identity. I would say, so I'm a kingdom and social entrepreneur.
So good. Christ follower, family man, kingdom, and social entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Amazing. I'm curious though. I know you're a business person, metrics person. In your life right now, how do you envision and measure success? How do you think about that right now?
Wow. I would say, first and foremost, and it's a daily struggle, is whether or not I am actually understanding God's will and being obedient in sort of fulfilling that. That would be my first and most important measure, because to some extent, I think that's all that matters. That God really has a desire for us, and knowing that and just being obedient to that, I think would be my first, the first and most important priority for me. I think, secondly, would be in terms of just sustainability, whether it's physical or material, or just mentally,
Yeah.
just working in a way where it's sustainable. And I guess one way to talk about it is whether or not I am in that place of shalom,
Mm.
where you're just at peace and things are in harmony, and not to say that we won't face any problems, but that even as we face challenges and problems, that we are at peace, and we are just still able to rest and be able to enjoy life and our friends and family. So that's really important to me, just to have that kind of shalom in my life.
So good. Thanks for sharing. I love that. I love that. And
it's a constant struggle, by the way, because every day brings curveballs, and every day brings
discipline. Yeah. And part of it is like, unlearning things that we've just kind of grown up with, certain mental models or just certain tendencies that we've just had. And you're talking about thinking from a kingdom mindset, right? Optimizing for eternity, and like all of these ideas that you're talking about. I mean, it's just not natural typically to think that way. And I don't know if Harvard or Princeton,
it's certainly not what I learned at Harvard. And it's, in a way, it's not what we learned at McKinsey, right? I mean, can you imagine people paying McKinsey a lot of money, and the answer is, well, just figure out what God wants and trust Him, right? It's I'm not sure how well that would fly, but actually, it's the best advice. I mean, there are so many things that I wish I had learned at an earlier age, in terms of just really inquiring of the Lord, for everything, every single decision. Just being in that mindset where I'm not going to figure this out on my own. I'm going to figure out what God wants, and then I'm just going to trust that that's the best thing to do, and I'm going to follow that. So partly it's just being in that place where I'm doing that as a discipline, as opposed to our normal my normal wiring, and also how I was brought up professionally, where you're supposed to do all of this on your own, and if you're in a senior position, it's up to you to figure it out and to tell everyone what they should do, right? So that I think that posture is really important. But then the other thing that I've come to learn over the years, especially at Hybrid, is it's about faith, because sometimes problem is big, challenges are there. God is silent, or maybe I'm not so sure, and and then He comes up with stuff, and you're like, really? Is that because it doesn't necessarily make sense. And what I've found is that when you step out in faith, then that's when things start to happen. But I've just generally found that if I don't step out in faith, right, that I nothing really moves yet. So there's been, for me, so many times when, as an entrepreneur, let's just take cash flow, right? And just, being able to make payroll, being able to do that, especially when you're getting started and the economic model is not quite there yet. God has just been so faithful. I remember during Typhoon Haiyan, there was a huge clamor for solar lights because so many places had no electricity. And basically, there were a lot of relief organizations that wanted to buy solar, but basically they would only buy it if you had the stock, right? I mean, if you didn't have stock, it was an emergency, so they would go elsewhere. And so we sold out of all of our stocks after a few weeks, and so we needed to order new stocks. And so so normally it takes months, but our supplier said, okay, we can supply you quickly, but you have to pay everything up front. Like cash
Wow.
up front, right? And it was like $800,000. And so I was like, well, we need this, and this is what the Lord is. He was just convicting me to make the commitment, and so I committed to the $800,000, but I did not have it, and I needed, we needed to pay within about 2 to 4 weeks, and because we didn't have any stock, I couldn't do anything back here in Manila, and I had a trip to the States that was already planned, and so I went ahead, and before I left, I had emailed some of our sort of partners and said, hey, we've got this huge need in the Philippines. Would you guys be willing to I need some funding, financing, so that we can get the stocks? And sent out a few emails, and one day later, when we landed in the States, one of the investors had committed $200,000, and then I went and gave a speech at Claremont McKenna, and then got a few more people donating a couple $100,000, and then I ended up at Princeton, where I was on the board. And Princeton starts and ends every board meeting with a prayer. Interestingly enough, right? And that particular week, it was my turn to give the prayer. So I just prayed and prayed, and
Wow.
some of the board members, came up, and also wanted to support. So by the time, 1 week later, I had the $800,000. Just crazy, just absolutely crazy, right? I had
Praise
no
God.
marketing materials, no plan, nothing. It was just sharing what was going on and the suffering that we saw, and just our commitment to help. And guess what? Other people saw that and said, we like what you're doing, and we want to help you.
What a story.
And that's been repeated, I would just say, dozens of times. And my wife Missy just keeps saying, you should write everything down so that you can share with your organization, because sometimes people don't really understand the struggles that the entrepreneur is going through, right? They don't see what's going on behind the scenes. So it's been a real journey in stepping out in faith and just learning to trust God. But I've found that He is faithful.
Amen.
And that He provides, He can provide more than you can imagine, just more than, right? And at speeds that are just crazy.
And just in time.
And just in time. He hasn't been late, never, not once. He hasn't been late. But I had to be ready, right? I had to be ready to give up, to give up my house, to give up, a lot of things. And that's what, and I think I always go back to the parables about the rich young ruler who, asked Jesus, how he can, enjoy eternal life. And Jesus said, well, you follow the commandments, you do this, this, this. And he said, well, I've done all of those.
Yeah.
And he said, but there's one more thing, right? You should, sell everything and follow me. And I think that was something that I wasn't willing to do for many, many years, just hanging on to that. And at some point, I just completely trusted, and, I'm willing to give it all up. And I have, I've had to give up certain things, but not everything yet.
Yeah.
But I think God just looks into our hearts, and and I'm also glad that it's also even affected my kids and their willingness to, their willingness to live frugally and not, accumulate for themselves, but to use all their resources, for God's kingdom. So
So good. That's so good. I do want to go back in just a little bit to the transition to hybrid, but I want to, honor this time in your life, right? Decades before hybrid, of you going through in the corporate world, McKinsey and Ayala, et cetera.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, what were some of the things that you learned, right, in these organizations, that you're really grateful for, right? I think at the end of the day, I think all of that was part of your preparation that
Yeah.
God needed for you, Jim Ayala, to go through these steps. And I'm sure there's a lot in parallel with your family and your wife and your kids happening there to then get you ready for what would now become hybrid. But I'm just curious to go back in time, the McKinsey days or Ayala days. What are
Yeah.
some of the things you're most proud of, or what were some of the biggest lessons learned there that you're really grateful for?
Wow. So at McKinsey, I would say that I'm super, super grateful for how I learned to really problem solve from first principles, and also to be thinking a lot about impact. How we can solve problems and have real impact. And I would say that that impact, to some extent, is about system change. It's about really changing how things work. And I've always had, I was always really upset, through the, because I was in college in the 80s, and then started working in the 90s. And as you know, the Philippines in the 70s was, sort of number 2 in Asia. And then over the years, we kept sliding down and down and down the rankings, and all the other countries were zooming ahead of us. And so it just felt that we were constantly punching, kind of beneath our weight, and where we should be and where we could be. And the result of that was just a lot of poverty and a lot of suffering. And one of the things that I learned was things don't really trickle down, even though that's what you learn in economics, right? You kind of, if GDP is going up, then everyone, a rising tide must be helping everyone. But in reality, the poor still stay poor, because it just doesn't trickle down. So I think at McKinsey, I was really, I learned a lot about problem solving, but problem solving at the system level. And I think that sort of has been really, really important, once we started hybrid and we're trying to change the whole electricity industry. I've had to think about things from first principles, but think about how to do things in such a way that you can actually scale it and solve, and really solve the problem, not just kind of solve it in small pockets or solve it around the edge.
Solving the symptoms, just sort of surface level.
Yeah, surface level, rather than changing the whole system. And so I think so that's what I learned at McKinsey. That was really really good. And then at Ayala, it's one thing to be a consultant. It's another thing to actually be the one to do it, and to mobilize, the strategies and the stakeholders and the partners, and of course your team,
and that capital. I mean, that's significant.
Mobilize capital. Yeah. And so I really learned to appreciate what it takes to actually execute. And of course, you're not executing it on your own. You're actually needing to galvanize, a lot of different stakeholders, not just the internal team, but also shareholders. And, we had to deal with mayors and communities and civil society, and, all sorts of different stakeholders, because we were basically developing cities. And so you bump into so many stakeholders, and it's, so I think at Ayala, I really started to appreciate how to think about very broad set of stakeholders, making sure that you are aligning everyone around the vision and sort of building a group of like-minded people that want to that share in that vision and want to partake in that vision. At the same time, there were always naysayers and people trying to get in the way of that, and so we also had to be very practical about how do we deal with people that are trying to stop us, because there were a lot of people, and sometimes they were just maybe misinformed or misguided, and sometimes they really were quite malicious. So that's really, I think I learned a lot about what it really takes, to do something, and again, do it at scale, do it, where everything is going to be sustainable.
Yeah.
It's one thing to build a building; it's another thing to make sure that it appreciates in value over time, and that people, it stays really well maintained over the years.
Right. No, it's so good. I love when I was in the Philippines last year. It's like every place I went, it's like you knew of the the project. I was staying in BGC. It's like you knew the whole city and the Sandra, which is where I was staying. But anyways, no, it's just so cool. I think so many good lessons learned, and I love how God uses all of that. Every aspect of our story is there by no accident, because now all of those things are coming into play and uniquely positioning you, right, to be someone who can solve this really complicated problem, which I want you to talk a little bit about, right, how we're ending energy poverty in the Philippines.
Yeah.
But tell us a little bit about that transition. I think you knew, right, you had this vision in your heart from when you were younger, but what were some of those like practical steps to transition out of your role at Ayala, right, as president and CEO of this organization, and taking the leap into full-on like entrepreneurship? Was it an overnight thing? Was it a 6 months or like a 12-month prayer fasting thing? Like, what was that process like for you to like make a decision? Like, yes, I am going to do this.
Yeah, I think it was definitely a process. And it really, the core of that process was really at church. And it's really my two pastors and my small group and my wife, I would say, so it was really my wife that, that brought me to church. And at church, I was discipled first by Pastor Joey, and then by Pastor Paulo. And I think they were the ones that really got me to understand, that God has a plan, and that we should follow that plan and just trust in that, and be faithful to that. And I continue to really learn very practical things, especially in my small group. It's a small group of business people, and so we're always talking about, making business decisions, but also, kind of what would God want us to do, and so I think the way I would say it is that God is in the business of opening doors and closing doors, and just at that time, I was really being convicted that my purpose was to really help the poor and help with economic development. I started to understand that, even though I thought I was doing that at Ayala Land, as we mentioned earlier, things don't really trickle down, and so 80% of the poor are actually in rural areas, and so I was really being called. I've always had a love for sort of going to the mountains and the ocean, and so it's really in the rural areas where the poor are. And so if I was really gonna be true to my calling, I needed to be working in rural areas, and real estate development is very much in urban areas, and we are building and creating jobs, but in reality, 80% of the action is in rural areas, and we just weren't there. So I started being convicted that it was about rural areas, and at Ayala, one of my corporate roles was to be focused on sustainability. So for the whole group, I was leading the charge on sustainability and really learning not just about environmental sustainability, but really learning about sustainability from let's say, even if you do environmental sustainability, for example, you got to work on the ecosystems. So if it's a coastal town, you've got the marine ecosystem, and so you have to preserve, the health of the reef. But there's so many incursions, and the incursions are all human, and it's because of what's happening with poverty and what's happening with the communities. And so if you want to solve sustainability environmentally, you also have to solve what's happening in poverty and what's happening in sort of the community ecosystem. So I started learning a lot about that, and I was introduced to the notion of social enterprise by one of my former McKinsey colleagues that had gone off and started working with Ashoka. And we were in Anvaya one day, and he was sharing all of that with me in the pool, in the swimming pool, and I kind of got baptized into the world of social enterprise. And when I learned about it, it really just resonated with me so much that here is a way that I can work, to help the poor, through an enterprise that's solving the social problems of the poor, using business in order to scale something so that the impact is actually commensurate with what I think I'm able to do.
Yeah.
And still hopefully be able to earn enough money to sustain sort of my own financial needs. I mean, I did at that point. None of the kids were in college yet, so imagine 3 kids going through college, and I have a mortgage and all that. So it kind of just all clicked that social enterprise was the way to go. And at that time, things were also at Ayala Land. It was just clear that I wanted to be involved doing something else, and so that's when I talked with my wife, and I said, I'm being pulled in this direction. What do you think? Right? It's a lot of uncertainty. We'll have to probably, a lot of our assets, we'll have to put into the business, and we'll probably have to tighten our belts and sort of change our lifestyle. And to her credit, after we prayed about it and just thought about it and talked it over, she was like, well, if this is what the Lord is asking you to do, we should do it. And we, so I retired, and we started. I didn't, hybrid wasn't there yet, but I started figuring out, what, how to sort of skin the cat and, approach rural poverty. And what was pretty neat was that my 3 kids thought it was pretty cool, that, what I was doing.
Affirming.
Yeah, but they had no idea what the financial implications were. So then I started getting into it. And so what I realized, so definitely I was focused on rural poverty. And so the question is how, like what's the angle?
Right. Yeah. And, so Jim, right? There's 20 million people or so in the Philippines unable to get out of poverty due to lack of reliable electricity. So that's a lot of people all over the country. And so, tell us, how is hybrid social solutions going to solve that?
Right. So, the reason we started a hybrid, if you look at the name, it's hybrid social solutions.
Right.
It's not hybrid solar solutions. And so our goal is really about poverty reduction. But what we noticed was you can't get out of poverty if you don't have power and energy. right? It turns out that everything, whether it's your quality of life, whether it's education, whether it's your business, whether it's a birthing center or a hospital, everything needs electricity, right? You need that power. So it was a common theme for development that there were just 20 million people that didn't have access to energy and electricity. And so therefore, we call it energy poverty. You can't get out of poverty if you don't have the energy. So I got really, really excited when I sort of realized that. I mean, it's super obvious in hindsight, but it was one of those things where there was what I found was the normal approach of most countries is, basically, if you want people to have electricity, guess what? You need to extend the grid, right? You need to build out the electricity grid and attach them to the grid so that people can have electricity. But we live in an archipelago. We've got lots of mountains and islands, and
thousands of islands,
and the grid just ain't gonna get there. And it just becomes really prohibitively expensive.
Yeah.
And even if you get it out there, it's so hard to sustain because we have all of these typhoons, and you have sort of winds blowing down the electricity lines, and so when that happens, I mean, it just happened with Typhoon Odette recently. It displaced 490,000 people, right? And three, and a month and a half later, you still have 2 or 3 million people whose electricity isn't back. So it's just a super huge challenge once you get to the periphery, for people to have access to electricity. And so that's the normal solution. So what I discovered in 2010, I met this German entrepreneur who was a former seminarian, by the way, who had invented this solar lamp, and it had a solar panel, and it had a battery, and it could power a really bright light, and you could charge your phone, and it was shockproof, and it was waterproof. So it seemed really, really promising. And so when I so I was already thinking about energy, and then I learned about this technology. And so I asked them, I said, hey, can I pilot this in the Philippines and become a distributor for this product? And so we piloted it together. We actually raised a little bit of money, and we got it in the hands of some people in Mindoro. And one of my first clients was a lady named Susana Di Maano. She had bought it from us. And she basically, when I came to ask her about how the light was doing, she was so excited, and she couldn't stop talking about it. She talked about how she used it for her pigs, because when her sow gave birth, she had 10 piglets, and you have to take care of them 24/7, and the light would last all night. And so she didn't lose any piglets. Normally you lose 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And then her husband used it to they had lanzones trees, and their problems were fruit bats. And these fruit bats would come and just feast on their lanzones. And so he used the light to every night he'd go out and he would drive away bats that were eating the lanzones, and their harvest improved by 30%, and they made $1,000 extra. And with that money, he bought a motorcycle, which they use for delivering their produce. And so it's been super, super helpful to have that motorcycle. And then the kids, of course, used it to study at night. They were able to do their homework at night. They were excited to study with this light. They weren't fighting over the one kerosene lamp anymore. And all 4 of them became honor students.
Wow.
So it was just crazy. And she had so many other stories. I mean, so when I found out about this, I was like, wow, this thing is the way to go. This little solar lamp is the way to go. And the beauty of it is you
Wow.
don't need to attach it to a grid. You can bring this lamp anywhere, and you can just stick the solar lamp on the ceiling, charge it, and then they have light and phone charging, and it's completely transformative.
That's amazing. How long do you think it was that, you knew the problem that you wanted to solve, and then how many months or weeks or whatever until you kind of got to this aha moment of, oh, I think this is the solution?
Yeah, so
How
that I
long was
think
that?
that it was pretty quick because I left Ayala in April of 2010, and then
Okay.
I met Harold shortly after because of my friend that who introduced me to social enterprise. He was one of his friends, so he introduced me because Harold wanted to expand in Asia. He's quite active in Africa, and he wanted to expand in Asia, so he found me, and
Wow.
so I started studying this whole thing, and by June I started hybrid. And we
Wow.
and Susanna gave us feedback by August or September, and then we started thinking seriously about, okay, this product makes a lot of sense, but then we started focusing on, okay, so how do we actually distribute it? Because obviously these rural communities are far flung. People don't know about the product. They can't afford it. You need loans and financing. You need to
Yeah.
be able to train people how to use it. You need to be able to service units when they break.
Mhm.
So there were so many things that we had to figure out.
Right.
Once we had this notion that this light is gonna be really critical, we then had to figure out how to build out the whole
Yeah.
distribution system,
That's crazy. And I know
and that's taken time.
that's taken time,
That's taken
but
three,
praise
four
God.
years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Praise God. Praise
Praise
God. Step by
God.
step, we just like kept solving. This is my McKinsey training, right? We just kept solving one problem at a time and
Right.
stitching it together so that the whole thing can work end to end and still be sustainable.
That's amazing. Yeah. And now you have this whole ecosystem of partners, MFIs and solar champions and NGOs and governments, et cetera, and
Right.
reaching thousands of towns all across the country. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And congratulations again on being sustainable. I'm curious though, how does that work for those who are maybe new to this idea of social entrepreneurship, and how do you actually achieve sustainability, like for hybrid? What does that look like?
Yeah.
How did you reach sustainability?
There are, in a way, two levels of sustainability. The first level was we found out pretty quickly that if somebody like Susanna bought one of our solar lights,
Mm-hmm.
it's really critical that we can make sure that that light is still working, you know, 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the road. Because if you we've seen situations where people donate lights, and after 3 months the light is broken.
Yeah.
And so the person who was the recipient of the light, they enjoyed it for 3 months, but then after 3 months they were back in the dark. So
Right.
so
Right.
we just felt that that's not very sustainable, obviously. So
Right.
we had to figure out how to make sure that once they got it, that it would actually last a long time.
Mhm.
And also that if they were happy with their light and they wanted another light or they needed to power something else, that they also would have the opportunity to add, to their assets, to add to their power situation at home. And so I think that was sort of the first big issue that we had to solve in terms of figuring out the sustainability of that.
Right.
And essentially, the solution to that is what we call a last mile value chain, where
Mhm.
that person, we have to make sure that the products are really robust. It turns out that the poor cannot afford poor quality. You would think that like what they would be buying would be really cheap, and that's what is normally available, and that's what breaks all the time. So we needed stuff that would last a long time, but of course it's more expensive, so we needed to provide financing. So
Yeah.
our clients can't afford $100 system, but they can certainly afford $2 per week for 50 weeks. So, but we needed partners to provide financing. And then it turns out that our clients would be so excited, they would bring the light home and they would leave it on all night. And in the morning, it would be dead. And eventually, most people would actually break their units because they didn't know how to. Yeah, it's like if you left the lights of your car on every night. In the morning, the battery would be dead, and maybe you can jump start it the first few times, but eventually you'll kill the battery. So there were so many things that people were doing wrong that would basically kill the system, and so we had to also train everyone on how to use it properly, and then we had to build technopreneur network to be able to service any broken unit. So I think that was you got to think about the sustainable business and ecosystem first. And so when we started laying all of that out, we were like, wow, this is really big. There are so many different pieces to it, and none of the pieces are in place. And so we had to figure out how to make each piece sustainable. So it had to be sustainable for the client. It had to be sustainable for the microfinance partner. It had to be sustainable for the technopreneur, right? Because otherwise, if it's not sustainable for all of the players, eventually they'll stop, and then you'll be back to square one. So that was really critical. And then at the same time, it had to be sustainable for us. And that's where we then had to work on our unit economics. So to support all this whole value chain, we needed to build solar hubs. These were our field offices supporting these value chains. And so that has a certain amount of overhead, that has a certain amount of people and cost. And so we needed our people to be generating sufficient revenue to cover all of that. And so one of the things it's you gotta, as a young entrepreneur, you gotta work out your margins. Here we are trying to help poor people, so we want to give it to them as cheap as possible. But you also need to earn enough margin to be sustainable. And it turns out we needed about a 50% margin, right? And people are like, why are you selling it so expensive? Like, these are poor people. You got to give it to them cheaper, right? Why make such a big margin? And partly it's because without the margin, we can't sustain all of this.
Yeah.
So we built that into the pricing. We built it in, and for our clients, it's still a really, really good price because they're paying $2 a week and they're earning $15 a week. Once they have it, right? So the thing pays for
itself. Sustainable.
And it's sustainable. And it's sustainable. So that was a big surprise, So we had to have that margin, and then each of our guys needed to sell a certain number of units per day, per week, per month, in order to sustain the operations. And it turns out that it's basically 3 units per day. Our guys just need to sell 3 units per day, and we're completely financially sustainable.
That's amazing.
So
and what I love about your work too is, the intentionality and the culture that you've built, right, with your service T values and sustainability, empowerment, resilience, versatility, integrity, commitment, excellence, teamwork. Just your intention in all of that. And I know more recently you've been talking a lot about being light, and really advancing, trying to integrate biblical principles in how you are like building the culture of your organization, while yes, promoting love and generosity and all of these things, as well as like a high performance culture, right? Which is amazing. And that is what we're called to do, right? To grow like Jesus in our character, yes, in our relationships, right? To love each other, love our neighbors as ourselves, but also in our competency, and continuing to work as we work for the Lord and tap into the creative genius of God that, he freely gives. And so I love, the direction that you're moving into. And I'm so inspired by it. And I know many of our listeners will be as well. We are nearing the end of our time here today, but I'm just curious, Jim, as a last question for me, for those young, aspiring entrepreneurs in the Philippines that might be listening today, what is one piece of advice or encouragement that you would want to share with them?
Yeah. I kind of covered it earlier. I would say that the sooner you can figure out what is your maker's design for you, what does he really want you to do, the better off you'll be, because it will frame and give you direction for a lot of things in your life. And so if you are able to know that, and so I would just recommend that people really pray about that, think about it, and really put in the effort to really understand, God's purpose for your life. And there's a lot of clues. He shapes you in a certain way, gives you a heart for certain things and certain capability. And of course, in prayer, I was able to start to understand that better. I think the sooner you can really understand that, everything else will start to fall into place in terms of, should you take this next job? Should you, what are the skills that you need to build if you're going to be doing that? And so that, I think I stayed too long at McKinsey. I think I stayed maybe too long at Ayala Land. I should have been doing what I'm doing much earlier. And I think if I had done that, I would be, in a way, a lot more in that area of shalom. I'll be more really in line with what God wants, right? And so I think being able to figure that out and just trusting that and trusting God and just stepping out in faith and pursuing that and just, faithfully, that's the best advice that I could give my 25-year-old self, I would say. and if I knew about that, I would have probably saved more. I would have put more aside, because being an entrepreneur, as you're bootstrapping your way, especially at the beginning, and you're figuring out like the business model and all that. The more you can do on your own, so that you can build up the value of the company, the less you'll have to give away to investors early on. If you don't have many resources, you're going to be giving up a lot early on to investors. And if you're not careful about who your investors are, you can sort of not be aligned with them and lose control of the company. So the more resources you have up front, the longer your, in Tagalog we say, mas mahaba yung PC mo, right? You've got more time to kind of build up value. So I would definitely have that in mind. It takes a few years, 2-3 years before people see real value. And so I think having that kind of resource is really an important discipline.
Such good words, such good advice. It reminds me of also Ephesians 2:10, for we're God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And so we get to discover it. The more that we spend time with him, the more that we obey, spend time in his word and in fellowship with others, we get to discover that unique assignment he has for us. And so, Jim, I thank you for being an inspiring exemplar to me and many, many others, not just in the Philippines, but all around the world, of someone who's so intentional in trying to fulfill their calling and really integrating their faith in and through like strategy and operations of your business. It truly is inspiring. And I just want to thank you for being with me today and for continuing to be an inspiration in my life. So God bless you and your family more.
Thank you. Thanks, Christine, and God bless you too.
Take care.